Dolly Parton isn't just the queen of country music. She is the steady heartbeat of America's soul, the woman whose voice once wrapped our pain in silk and returned it to us as hope. For over 6 decades, her songs have carried the weight of our heartbreak and turned it into light. But tonight, that same voice stands on the fragile edge of silence. Her sister Frida Parton wrote in the middle of the night, "I was up all night praying for my sister Dolly. She hasn't been feeling her best lately. I truly believe in the power of prayer, and I've been led to ask everyone who loves her to pray with me." When a message like that comes from blood, you know the worry is real. From the cold hills of Tennessee to the thrones of music history, Dolly carried grace where others carried scars. She gave the world Jolene Coat of Many Colors and I Will Always Love You songs that turned heartbreak into healing, loneliness into love, and pain into poetry. And now, at 79, as the lights of Las Vegas fade and the world holds its breath, a quiet question lingers: can the voice that once healed millions find its own strength again? Before we begin, light a candle for her, a prayer for the woman who poured her heart into every note and never stopped giving. Some souls come into this world already bruised, carrying wounds too deep for childhood to mend. Dolly Rebecca Parton was one of them. Long before any doctor's warning or headline ever brushed her name, she had already learned the secret art of survival, not in hospitals, but in the hollows of the great Smoky Mountains that raised her. From a one-room cabin crouched between ridges where the wind sang through the pine like a morning hymn, she learned how to turn hunger into strength and silence into song. Tonight, as the music pauses and the world waits, we find ourselves asking not just about her health, but about the story of a spirit that refused to break. Because sometimes the hardest song to sing is the one about your own life. But the darkest secret was yet to be revealed. Long before the world knew her name, before the rhinestones and standing ovations, Dolly Parton was a child of the mountains, a barefoot girl born into the hum of wind and prayer. She came into the world on a freezing January night in 1946 in a cabin so small the walls seemed to breathe with the cold. There was no electricity, no running water, only the steady rhythm of her mother's labored breath and the quiet courage of a father who paid the doctor with a sack of cornmeal. Her cradle was a quilt patched with faith and exhaustion, her lullaby, the moan of the wind through the trees. Outside, the stars burned bright but distant, as if heaven itself kept its distance from that little cabin. The Partons were not just poor, they were shaped by poverty, wrapped in it like a second skin. Winter stretched so long that spring felt like rumor. The wind had teeth. It bit through quilts, through wood, through the thin walls that tried to hold warmth. Dolly would wake in the darkness, her breath clouding before her face. 12 children huddled together beneath one worn blanket. That was the only warmth we knew, she would say years later, smiling through the ache of memory. Yet even in those merciless nights, something beautiful was being born. The hardship taught her rhythm, the heartbeat of survival. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, could not read or write, but his hands spoke the language of sacrifice. Calloused, cracked, steady, they built a life out of grit. Her mother, Avi Lee, moved like a hymn, soft, constant, exhausted her fingers, stitching scraps of fabric and fragments of faith into something whole. At 6 years old, Dolly fetched water from the creek, rocked her baby siblings to sleep, stirred beans over a wood stove until the smoke stung her eyes. She owned no dolls, no dresses, no treasures, only the truth that love meant labor and that the purest kind of faith was born in endurance. Then came the winter of 1955, when silence settled heavier than snow. Her baby brother Larry lived only 4 days. There was no funeral, no marker, just a small patch of earth behind the house where sorrow learned to breathe. Her mother's hands folded like broken wings, her father's steps grew slower, heavier, and little Dolly, the girl who sang to fill the quiet, met a silence that would echo through her life. Later, she would say that some of her songs were whispers to the brother she barely met, melodies meant for a child who never learned to speak. School offered little refuge. One year, her mother sewed her a coat from scraps of cloth, each patch chosen with love, each color meant as pride. But her classmates only saw rags. Laughter followed her through the snow as she walked home, chin lifted, tears hot on her cheeks. That humiliation would one day become redemption, the seed of a song called Coat of Many Colors, a hymn to dignity and love. Even decades later, she could barely sing it without breaking her voice, trembling where memory still hurt. By 7, she had already found her salvation in music. Songs became her escape, her rebellion, her prayer. She wrote before she could spell, turning hunger into melody, loneliness into lullaby, grief into grace. "I didn't write to be famous," she would whisper years later. "I wrote to survive." Every cold night, every blistered foot, every patched blanket became part of the instrument she carried inside, a voice born from struggle, sharpened by loss, and softened by faith. Before the applause, before the fame, that voice was her only shield. It rose from the hollows of Tennessee like smoke from a winter fire, fragile, defiant, and unbroken. Even now, in the twilight of her years, that little girl still hums inside her, reminding the world that even when life gives you nothing, you can still make something beautiful out of it. But destiny was waiting just beyond the hills. By the time Dolly Parton turned 10, her voice had already become a kind of miracle, clear, aching, and ancient, as if the mountains themselves had chosen her to sing their secrets. The world around her was still small, a front porch, a patch of sky, a creek that carried their songs downstream. Her first audience was the forest, the trees swaying like a congregation as she sang into the open air. Each note was a promise that someday, somehow, she would carry her family's story beyond those ridges. In 1956, she began traveling with her uncle Bill Owens. They chased radio towers and smoky backroom studios like fireflies in the dark. Their car was old, the gas tank half full, but their dreams overflowed. They slept on borrowed couches on church pews, and sometimes in the back seat of a tired Chevy parked beneath a Tennessee sky that shimmered with cold stars. It was exciting, hungry, and heartbreaking all at once, she would later say. Mornings came with frost on the windows and nothing to eat but hope, and still she sang. When she graduated from Sevier County High School in 1964, there was no celebration, no party, just a promise whispered to herself. Standing alone on a dirt road at sunrise, a cardboard suitcase in one hand and a bus ticket in the other, she said quietly, "I'll make it, or I won't come back at all." With $20 in her pocket, she boarded a Greyhound bus bound for Nashville. The mountains that had raised her shrank in the rearview mirror until they looked like ghosts. Nashville shimmered with neon promises, bright from afar, cold up close. Doors closed, voices mocked her accent. Some called her sweetheart and never called again. She rented a tiny room by the week, the wallpaper peeling, the floor creaking under her steps. At night she watched the rain slide down the window, the sound of cars outside whispering of a world that seemed just out of reach. There were nights, she once said softly, when I sang just to keep from disappearing. In those lonely months, she learned the rhythm of rejection, the tempo of resilience. Every no became a note, every slammed door, another verse in a song still unwritten. When the city turned its back, she turned to prayer, the same one her mother had taught her years before in the mountains. Keep going, girl. Just keep going. And then in 1965, the first miracle came, small but certain. Monument Records offered her a contract. But miracles, as Dolly learned early, often come with conditions. They told her she was too country, too mountain, too much. They wanted her polished, sweetened, dipped in sugar instead of smoke. They gave her songs like Happy, Happy Birthday Baby, and she sang them perfectly, but each note felt borrowed, like wearing someone else's skin. I felt like I was pretending to be another girl she would admit years later. When the singles failed, the calls stopped. The label went silent. But Dolly's fire never dimmed. By day, she played in smoky bars where no one listened. By night, when the power was cut, she wrote by candlelight lyrics scrawled across envelopes, old receipts, the backs of torn flyers. Her hands cramped from exhaustion, her stomach ached from hunger, but still she sang softly to herself, humming just to hear something alive. And somewhere in that darkness, she found her sound. The world didn't know it yet, but a new kind of voice had been born, a voice that carried the ache of the hills and the hunger of a dreamer who refused to be erased. The next chapter of her story would change everything. The world first heard the name Dolly Parton in 1966, carried quietly through the airwaves on a song called Put It Off Until Tomorrow. She had written it with her Uncle Bill, and though it was sung by another artist, it reached #1 on the country charts. For a moment, the wind shifted. People on Music Row began asking, "Who's Dolly Parton?" It was the question she had been waiting her whole life to answer. In 1967, her debut album, Hello, I'm Dolly, announced her arrival. It wasn't just an introduction, it was a declaration of self. Those songs were not fantasies or industry fabrications. They were carved from hunger and faith, from long nights in a one-room cabin and longer nights in cheap motels. Each lyric was a prayer wrapped in melody, each chorus a survival story told in harmony. She was no longer a girl singing to the mountains. She was a woman turning pain into power. Yet even as she rose, Nashville didn't quite know what to do with her. Some saw her as a novelty, others as a smile in sequins. But behind that smile was steel. Beneath the curls and glitter lived a barefoot girl who had once sung to the hills just to stay alive. When critics called her style too much, she only smiled brighter. "I didn't come all this way to be told who I am," she said. And then came 1973, the moment when her heart, her art, and her courage collided. She wrote a song called I Will Always Love You. It was a farewell not to fame, but to the man who had both lifted and confined her, the mentor who had become her shadow, Porter Wagoner. For years, she had stood beside him on the Porter Wagoner show, her golden voice beaming into millions of homes every week. Together, they were television's favorite duet, sunshine and charm wrapped in harmony. But off-screen creative tension grew heavier by the day. Each time she wrote something raw, something too true, the room grew colder. "I felt like I was living in somebody else's shadow," she confessed. In 1974, she made the choice she feared most. She would walk away from the show that had made her name and from the man who had opened so many doors. It wasn't rebellion, it was survival. She didn't shout her goodbye, she sang it. I Will Always Love You was both an ending and a blessing, a love letter stitched from heartbreak and gratitude. "I cried all the way to the top of the charts," she said later, and she meant it. Because success born from loss always feels like mourning disguised as triumph. Behind the curtain as the applause thundered, she stood alone, mascara-streaked chest, trembling, whispering to herself, "You did the right thing." The song that broke her heart became the song that defined her. The world would never look at her the same again, and yet even in that victory, pain lingered. The price of freedom was solitude. But Dolly had already learned what to do with sorrow, turn it into song. Her next masterpiece was waiting just beyond the ache. In 1973, the same year she wrote her tender farewell, Dolly released another song that would haunt generations, Jolene. A story so simple, it felt like a whisper, yet so human, it cut straight through the noise. The melody trembled with vulnerability, the lyrics a confession turned prayer. It wasn't just about jealousy, it was about fear, the fear of being unseen, of losing something sacred. It wasn't just a hit, Dolly later said. It was a mirror. And that mirror reflected more than heartbreak. It revealed the quiet strength of a woman learning to face the world alone. But fame is never a gentle companion. The mid-1970s tested Dolly's body and soul like never before. Endless tours, flashing lights, interviews, and rehearsals blurred the line between life and performance. She smiled through exhaustion, her hands aching from guitar strings, her back burning beneath tight corsets, her voice pushed to its limits under the weight of expectation. She learned to hide her pain behind sequins, to let the sparkle do the talking when her spirit felt dim. Some nights I'd walk off stage and just collapse, she said years later. Guess I sparkled too hard tonight. The world saw a radiant icon, but behind the curtain was a woman unraveling quietly piece by piece. Still, she refused to surrender. When others told her to slow down, she worked harder. When they told her to change, she doubled down. I won't be reduced to a formula, she vowed. It was defiance disguised as grace. Then in 1977, light broke through the storm. Here You Come Again soared to #1, crossing over from country to pop with effortless charm. Purists accused her of betrayal. She just smiled and said, I wasn't leaving country. I was taking it with me. That single sentence captured the essence of Dolly Parton, fearless evolution without losing herself. Her music had grown bigger, but her soul remained rooted in the red clay of Tennessee. And then came 1980, 9 to 5. Written in one sleepless night on a film set beside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, it became an anthem for every woman who had ever worked herself past the breaking point and kept going anyway. The song thundered across charts and continents, turning Dolly from country star to cultural icon. To the world, she was unstoppable, but inside, the cracks were beginning to show. The schedule was merciless: 12-hour film shoots, studio sessions that stretched into dawn appearances, red carpets and flights that blurred together. There were mornings, she said softly, when I'd look in the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back. The lashes, the hair, the smile, all still there, but behind them lived a heart running on painkillers, caffeine, and prayer. For Dolly, music had always been medicine, but even medicine can lose its strength when the body begins to fail. The glow that had once seemed eternal began to flicker. The applause grew louder, but the silences between the songs became longer, heavier. She was beginning to realize that even legends can break. Yet every time she stepped on stage, she did what she had always done. She turned pain into melody, struggle into song, and fear into faith. Because to Dolly Parton, the show was never just about performance. It was about survival. But the brightest stars often cast the darkest shadows. By the mid-1980s, the storm around Dolly had changed its shape. It no longer roared with fame and flashing lights. It whispered through exhaustion and quiet despair. The tours never stopped, the cameras never turned away, and every smile she gave the world came at the cost of another piece of herself. She had climbed to the summit of success, but the air there was thin, and she was running out of breath. Music was changing, trends rose and fell like restless tides. Yet Dolly stood her ground, refusing to chase what felt hollow. She sang Tennessee homesick blues in 1984, Why'd You Come In Here, Looking Like That. In 1989, proof she could evolve without losing her soul. If I tried to chase trends, she said, I'd just get lost in the crowd. Her tone was calm, her faith steady, but underneath was fatigue, the kind that seeps into your bones after a lifetime of giving too much. By the end of that decade, Dolly Parton was not just an artist, she was an institution. Her name shimmered brighter than the rhinestones on her gowns. Her songs had become part of America's heartbeat, stories of pain and perseverance woven with grace. But every triumph carried a shadow, and hers came quietly in the stillness between applause. When the lights dimmed and the crowd faded into memory, she often found herself alone with ghosts, memories of the cabin in Locust Ridge, of her baby brother Larry, who had lived only 4 days of the lullabies her mother once hummed. "I think I've been singing to the people I've lost all my life," she once said. That confession was soft, but it carried the weight of decades. The grief she never spoke became the pulse beneath her melodies, the tremor in her voice that made strangers cry without knowing why. Her mother, Avi Lee, was still the anchor of her heart, the quiet muse behind her every note. But in 2003, when Avi Lee passed away, something inside Dolly went still. To the world, she remained radiant, glittering beneath stage lights. But inside, the sun had set. She kept touring, kept smiling, kept showing up for others because that's what her mama had taught her to do. Yet even she admitted that for a long time, she was merely walking through the days, not living them. The woman who had once turned every wound into song suddenly found one she couldn't sing. Her mother's death wasn't a moment, it was a silence that stretched on for years. There were nights, friends said, when she would sit backstage alone, the original coat of many colors folded across her lap, her fingers tracing its seams like a map leading back to the cabin of her childhood. The coat that had once protected her from the winter now protected her from grief. Still in time, she began to speak of her mother, not with tears, but reverence. "My mama is in every good thing I've ever done," she told an audience once, her voice trembling but proud. "She taught me that we may not have much, but if we have love, we have enough." When she finally sang Coat of Many Colors again, it sounded different. To the crowd, it was hope. To her, it was communion, a prayer between daughter and mother, stitched together with faith. Through the ache, through the years, Dolly learned something that would become the quiet truth of her life, that love doesn't end when a body does. It lingers, humming softly through time, just like a song that refuses to fade. But another heartbreak was waiting, one even her music couldn't heal. Among all of Dolly Parton's 12 siblings, none were closer to her heart than Floyd. He wasn't just her brother, he was her mirror in melody, her quiet twin in creation. From the earliest days in Locust Ridge, they sat side by side on the front porch, a battered guitar between them, the hills echoing their harmonies. They finished each other's lines, understood each other's silences. What one began, the other completed. "We were like the same song," she once said softly, just sung in 2 different voices. Floyd's name never blazed in lights the way his sister's did, but it lived quietly in the credits of her records, in the rhythm of her phrasing, in the breath between her notes. Together they wrote songs like Rockin' Years, a #1 hit in 1991, born not from ambition, but from understanding. He was her co-writer, her confidant, her bridge back to the barefoot girl who once sang to the mountains. Then in December 2018, that harmony broke. Floyd Parton died at 61. To the world, it was a headline that passed too quickly. But to Dolly, it was as if someone had stolen a verse from her soul. "He understood my heart before I said a word," she later whispered. When he was gone, that language disappeared. There were no televised tributes, no bright stages, no applause. Just a quiet funeral in a small Tennessee chapel nestled between the hills that had raised them both. Family and friends sang Rockin' Years one last time, no instruments, no microphones, only trembling voices breaking and reforming like the wind through cedar branches. Those who were there said you could hear the ache in every note. It wasn't performance, it was prayer. In the months that followed, a soft shadow seemed to follow Dolly wherever she went. She kept working, kept smiling for cameras, but her light had dimmed. At night she would sit alone, with her guitar fingers hovering above the strings they once strummed together, unable to finish the verse. "The chords don't sound right anymore," she confessed to a friend. "They feel unfinished." Floyd had been her grounding force, the one who reminded her of where she came from and why she sang in the first place. Losing him was like losing the map that led her home. For the first time, even music, the medicine that had carried her through every storm, failed her. There were no melodies strong enough to hold this grief, and yet even in that silence, something sacred remained. When she performed, there were moments when her eyes drifted upward, as if listening for a harmony the audience could not hear. Maybe she still felt him there, somewhere between the chords, between the applause and the thin air, where love lingers long after the song ends. It was a loss that marked her deeply, but fate was not done testing her heart. Another tragedy was coming, one that would wound her in a way she had never known before. The next heartbreak came quietly, but it cut deeper than any before. It wasn't the loss of fame or health, it was blood, the kind of pain that seeps into a soul and never leaves. Her beloved niece Tiver, just 36 years old, was gone. A young woman full of tenderness and struggle, fighting demons that daylight couldn't chase away. To the outside world, it was another sad story. To Dolly, it was a wound without sound. Tiver had battled addiction and heartbreak for years. Custody fights had worn her spirit thin. Loneliness had become her constant companion, and beneath her brave smile was a storm that few ever saw. Dolly had tried to help her in every way she could. She paid $25,000 out of her own pocket for Tiver's rehab, not for headlines or reputation, but out of desperate love. "I just wanted her to have another chance," she whispered later. But the healing never came. The darkness, slow and patient, returned. When the call came, it wasn't loud. There were no flashing cameras, no statements, no public mourning. Just a quiet chapel, a handful of family, and a woman who had given the world joy, now sitting in stillness, her hands trembling around a folded handkerchief. Those close to her said she barely spoke that day. She just stared ahead, her eyes empty, as if waiting for her niece to walk through the door one more time. After the funeral, the house was silent. The woman whose songs had healed millions now found herself powerless to save one life, the one she loved most. "How could I have written all those songs about hope," she said softly once, "and still not find the right words to save her?" That question followed her for months through recording sessions, long car rides, and sleepless nights. Friends noticed a change. Her laughter came slower, her sentences would trail off mid-thought, her gaze distant, her eyes glassy. Sometimes she'd fall quiet in the middle of a conversation, as if she was hearing a melody no one else could hear, the unfinished song of the life that ended too soon. "Some heartbreaks," she said later, "are too heavy for melody. They live in the corners of your soul, and you just learn to carry them." For the first time, Dolly faced a truth she had always tried to sing past, that even the kindest hearts cannot save everyone. Even love has limits. She had built schools, given books to children across the world, lifted entire generations with her songs. But all that power couldn't stop the silence that followed her niece's final breath. And yet, in the middle of her grief, something sacred began to take root. She learned that love's truest form isn't saving, it's staying. Staying present, even when the music stops, when there's nothing left to give, except your quiet company and your unbroken heart. "I couldn't bring her back," Dolly said once, "but I can love her still." That's what she did. Every time she sang, every time she smiled through tears, it was a way of holding on. A lullaby for a girl who never found her chorus, a promise that even the songs that end too soon can still echo in the heart. But fate was not finished. Another battle was waiting, this time inside her own body. When the body that had carried her through decades of light and labor finally began to falter, Dolly Parton met the one enemy she couldn't outsing: her own mortality. The first signs came quietly, disguised as fatigue, as breathless moments between notes. For years, she had ignored them, pushing through pain with laughter and lipstick, repeating the same vow she'd made since childhood, the show M, but by doctors called it endometriosis, an invisible war that ravaged her from within. The diagnosis came like a betrayal. Her voice could still fill an arena, but her strength was fading. Each performance became a test of endurance. Fans saw only sparkle, but behind the curtains, she would clutch her stomach, biting back pain as her band played the opening chords. She refused to let the world see her weakness. You smile, you sing, and you keep going. But in 1982, after a night of unbearable pain, she collapsed. Surgery saved her life, but it took away something she had always dreamed of, the possibility of motherhood. The doctor's words were clinical, efficient. Dolly's silence was not. When the lights dimmed and the nurses left, she lay awake, hands resting over her stomach, realizing she was saying goodbye to a future that would never come. The dream of small hands, soft laughter, and the word mama gone. Mama. She returned home to an empty house, the ticking of a clock echoing like a heartbeat she couldn't soothe. The woman who had turned every hardship into music now faced one she couldn't transform. It was a stillness, she said later. Not sadness, just emptiness. Days blurred into one another. She stopped writing, stopped performing. The silence she had always feared finally found her. Then one night, as she sat alone in the dim light of her kitchen, that silence grew too heavy, the thoughts too dark. She later admitted that she came dangerously close to ending her own life. And then a sound, the soft padding of paws on the floor. Her little dog Popeye walked in and looked up at her with eyes so full of love that it cracked the darkness open. That simple, wordless devotion pulled her back from the edge. He saved my life, she said, but really, it was my heart deciding to beat again. The climb back to herself was not quick. It came in whispers, not songs. Faith first, then courage, then melody. When she finally began to write again, the music that poured out was quieter, wiser. The songs carried light, not glitter, the kind of light born from surviving darkness. That time stripped me down, she said. It taught me what matters. The sparkle is nice, but the soul is what shines. From that moment, Dolly Parton stopped chasing perfection. She sang for the broken, the lonely, the people hanging on by a thread, because she had been there too. She learned that real strength isn't in never falling, it's in singing anyway. And when she returned to the stage, she didn't just perform, she testified. Each lyric was a heartbeat, each smile a declaration that she was still here, still shining, still unbroken. But love had one more lesson waiting for her, a lesson written not in fame or faith, but in loss, the kind of loss that doesn't fade with applause. For decades, through the chaos of fame and the glare of the spotlight, there was one constant in Dolly Parton's life: Carl Dean. To the world, she was a legend. To him, she was simply his Dolly. He never called her a superstar. He called her baby. Their love began long before the rhinestones and the records, back when she was just a girl chasing dreams, and he was a quiet man who wanted nothing from her but her laughter. For nearly 60 years, he was her stillness in a world that never stopped spinning. While the crowd screamed her name, Carl stayed in the shadows, mowing the lawn, fixing the porch, waiting for her at home. He never needed the world to see what he already knew, that behind the glitter lived a gentle woman with calloused hands and an open heart. In a life filled with noise, he was her silence. In an industry built on image, he was her truth. Then in 2025, that silence deepened. Carl Dean passed away at 82 quietly in their Nashville home, the same house where they had shared coffee at sunrise and whispered prayers before sleep. There were no flashing cameras, no headlines, no red carpets, just the stillness of a room that had lost its heartbeat. For Dolly, it wasn't just the loss of a husband, it was the loss of the only version of herself untouched by fame. Friends said she retreated behind drawn curtains, calls went unanswered, meals cooled untouched on the table, the guitar sat silent in its stand. It felt like even my songs left with him, she whispered once. The woman who had given the world joy suddenly couldn't lift her own spirit. When it came time to say goodbye, she refused the public spectacle. She planned the funeral herself, simple and private, a love letter, not a show. The chapel sat on their property, built from cedar filled with his favorite wildflowers, the kind he used to leave on her kitchen table in a chipped mason jar. Photographs lined the altar, not the glamorous ones the world had seen, but the real ones. Muddy smiles after planting a garden Christmas mornings, in flannel pajamas, the two of them barefoot on the porch swing, hands knotted together like roots. When she finally stood to speak, she didn't look at the crowd. Her eyes stayed fixed on the casket. She thanked him not for the years, but for the small things, for protecting her from a world that sometimes forgot her humanity, for loving her when she wasn't Dolly Parton, and for keeping her secrets safe. Then she unfolded a yellowed letter written by Carl long ago to be opened only after I'm gone. Her hands shook as she read. "You were always my shining star," it said, "but I never needed the world to know, just you." By the last line, her voice broke completely. The chapel fell into silence. Then she reached for her guitar, the first one he had ever bought her, and began to play a song no one had ever heard before, one she had written decades earlier, just for him. Her voice cracked, her tears fell freely, and every person in that small room wept with her, not for the legend, but for the woman, human, fragile, and brave. When the last note faded, she set the guitar down and stepped away, not toward the guests, but into the quiet that now belonged to her. In the weeks that followed, loneliness became her shadow. Each morning, she still set 2 cups on the table before remembering there was only one. Each night, she whispered goodnight into the dark, not out of habit, but because love that deep doesn't vanish. It lingers in the air, in the spaces between breaths, in the hush that follows a song. "I've written 1,000 love songs," she said softly once, but he was the only one that ever truly mattered. And as the years began to slow her steps, the weight of that absence grew heavier. Her sister Frida posted online what the world had feared to hear: Dolly hadn't been feeling her best. At 79, she had postponed her Las Vegas shows, urged by doctors to rest. To fans, it was a shock. To those who loved her, it was a plea for prayer. But rest has never come easy for a heart that's never stopped giving. Now, at 79, Dolly Parton moves through her days in a kind of quiet grace. The world still calls her a legend, but she lives like someone who has nothing left to prove. The mansion in Brentwood, Tennessee, where she and Carl spent nearly 6 decades together, remains immaculate. The gardens bloom, the fountains sing, sunlight spills across marble floors as if nothing has changed, and yet everything has. On the porch where they once talked until dawn, one rocking chair sways gently in the wind, while the other sits still. His boots remain by the door, polished but untouched. His newspaper lies folded on the armrest, waiting for hands that will never turn its pages again. The house still hums with life staff, moving quietly, family visiting with laughter. But when the last car drives away and the doors close, silence fills the air like fog. Most mornings Dolly rises before the sun, not because she has to, but because she can't sleep past the hour when they once shared coffee. She brews 2 cups out of habit, sets them on the kitchen table, and watches the steam rise from the one that will never be touched. She eats in stillness, the clink of her spoon echoing through the room like a heartbeat she can't quite find. After breakfast, her footsteps often lead her down a familiar path to Carl's chapel, the small cedar sanctuary on their land. The air there smells of candle wax and memory. She sits in the front pew, the morning light spilling across her hands, and hums melodies no one will ever hear. Songs meant for him. Sometimes she smiles through the tears, whispering, "You always hated to see me cry, so I'll make the angels smile instead." To the outside world, Dolly still shines. She still writes, still answers, letters still tends to Dollywood, and still gives her love to strangers who need it. Her imagination library has now gifted more than 200 million books to children around the world, a legacy born from the maternal love she never got to spend on her own. "If I couldn't have my own children," she once said, "I could help raise everyone else's." It wasn't just a line, it was her truth. Her catalog of over 3,000 songs continues to earn millions, but she no longer counts success in dollars or charts. "Carl always said I was richer in heart than in money," she laughed once, and now more than ever, that feels right. Yet behind the laughter, time is doing what it always does, softly, relentlessly, taking what it must. Her once boundless energy has slowed, her hands tremble faintly, her breath catches between sentences, her steps have grown deliberate. She speaks of her upcoming medical procedures with the same calm courage that has always defined her. "Honey, I've been through worse," she said recently with a grin. "The Lord's got me." Her sister Frida's midnight post, "Please pray for my sister Dolly," spread across the world within hours. Millions of fans shared photos, lyrics, and prayers. It wasn't just celebrity concern, it was collective love, a gratitude that spanned generations. People who had been comforted by her songs were now returning the kindness. For once, the woman who had healed so many was being held by the very world she once carried. Dolly calls this time a season of stillness. She spends her days between doctor visits, quiet walks, and hours in her studio, surrounded by guitars, old photographs, and the ghosts of melodies yet to be written. There, in the hush between heartbeats, she hums softly tunes that sound more like prayers than songs. "Music still saves me," she said, just in smaller ways. Even as her body slows, her spirit keeps its rhythm. Faith remains her compass. Love remains her song. She once said she didn't fear death, only the thought of leaving unfinished songs behind. Perhaps that is her truest legacy, the belief that love once sung with honesty never dies, it simply changes its key. And when the day finally comes, when the world grows quiet, and the stage lights fade to black, her voice will remain echoing softly across time. Because legends are not measured by how loudly they live, but by how gently they stay. And some voices once heard never fade. There are few lives that feel larger than their music, but Dolly Parton's life has always been one of them. Her story is more than a career, it's a hymn about endurance, a testament to how light can be born from pain. From that one-room cabin in the Smoky Mountains to the grandest stages on earth, her voice has carried the weight of generations. She turned poverty into poetry, loss into legacy, and heartbreak into hope. Every lyric she's ever written bears the fingerprints of hunger, faith, and grace. She gave the world beauty, not through perfection, but through persistence, proof that even the smallest flame can outshine the dark if it refuses to go out. Now, as she faces this final fragile chapter, the world that once leaned on her songs leans in again, not with pity, but with prayer. Her sister's plea for strength became a chorus that stretched across continents. Fans lit candles, shared her lyrics, and whispered her name into the night. For decades, she has been the heartbeat of compassion. Now those hearts beat for her. When asked recently how she feels about slowing down, she smiled softly and said, "I think the Lord's just tuning my next song." That's Dolly turning even decline into music, even uncertainty into faith. She has always believed that life is a melody, and when one verse ends, another begins somewhere beyond the silence. If her story teaches anything, it's that beauty isn't found in what we keep, but in what we give away. She has given everything, her words, her warmth, her wounds, and turned them into light for others to walk by. And as time takes her gently by the hand, that light doesn't dim, it deepens. So tonight, wherever you are, if one of her songs ever held you, healed you, or helped you say goodbye, take a moment, whisper her name, send her a prayer, not of sorrow, but of gratitude, for the courage to keep singing through pain and the grace to turn that pain into love. Because some voices never truly fall silent. They linger in the air, in the heart, in the spaces where words fail and melody takes over. And when the world finally grows still, her music will still hum through it, soft and eternal, like a memory that refuses to fade. Some stories were never meant to be known, but now you know. And somewhere in the quiet folds of Tennessee, as dawn breaks over the same mountains that once held her lullabies, a light flickers through the mist. It's the light from her chapel window, the small cedar one where she still sits each morning. Inside, the air smells of candle wax and prayer, and her guitar rests against the pew beside her. Her fingers, softer now, trace its worn strings like old scars that no longer hurt. She hums a melody, one you've never heard, one she's never recorded. It's not for the charts, not for the crowds, but for the memories that refuse to fade. Her mother's hands, sewing that patchwork coat, her father's callous grip as he built a life from dust, the laughter of siblings, the cry of the baby brother who never grew up, the niece she couldn't save, and the husband who loved her before the world ever knew her name. Each note is a goodbye, and yet somehow a beginning. When she finally steps outside, the morning air catches the edge of her voice and carries it through the hills. It drifts over the trees, across the fields, and down to the creeks where she once sang barefoot and unafraid. Somewhere a bird answers, and for a moment it sounds like harmony. Dolly smiles. The years have thinned her frame, slowed her pace, but they've only deepened her radiance. The wrinkles that line her face now shimmer like echoes of every song she's ever sung, every heartbreak she's ever survived. She knows her body is fading, but her soul still glows like sunrise, tender, defiant, eternal. In the stillness, she looks up at the sky and whispers, "I'm not done singing yet." Then she laughs, the same golden laugh that once filled arenas, and walks back toward her house, her shadow long, but her spirit unbowed. Because legends never really leave us. They linger in the light that filters through the cracks, in the melodies that haunt us when the night grows too quiet, in the courage to keep going even when the world falls silent. Dolly Parton's story was never just about fame or fortune, it was about faith. The faith that music can heal, that kindness can endure, and that love, when sung honestly, can outlast time itself. Her songs will keep playing long after the final curtain falls, reminding us that even pain, when touched by grace, can become something beautiful. And maybe that's the secret she's carried all along, that the most powerful kind of music isn't the one that makes you dance, but the one that makes you feel seen, forgiven, and loved. Because in the end, Dolly Parton didn't just sing to the world, she sang for it. And long after her voice fades into heaven's echo, the melody of her heart will remain soft, sacred, and unbroken. Some stories end in silence, hers ends in song. And in that song, quiet, trembling, eternal, there's a truth the world keeps learning from her. Dolly Parton's life has never been about the stage lights or the glittering gowns. It's been about what happens after the applause fades, when there's no camera left to smile for. It's been about the kind of love that stays when the spotlight goes out. Those who know her say that even now, when she's too tired to perform, she still sings softly to herself at night. Sometimes gospel hymns, sometimes old mountain tunes her mother once sang over the crackle of a wood stove. She doesn't sing to remember, she sings to stay alive. Every note is a heartbeat, every verse a reminder that grace can survive anything. And that's what makes her story timeless. The world sees the sequins, the laughter, the sparkle, but the real miracle of Dolly Parton is her gentleness. The way she turned poverty into compassion, the way she made forgiveness look like strength, the way she took the bruises of life and stitched them into something radiant. There's a story she once told that feels almost like a farewell. She said that one night years ago she dreamed she was back in the Smoky Mountains. She was standing barefoot in the field where her childhood home once stood, and the sky was glowing with the same pink light she remembered from her youth. Her mother was there smiling, her baby brother Larry too, and Carl standing a few steps away holding a cup of coffee in his hands. She said in the dream she wasn't sad, she wasn't even old, she was just home. And in the distance she could hear her own voice, young, wild, and full of life, singing through the mountains again. That's how legends live forever, not in marble or memory, but in moments that refuse to disappear. When we hear her songs, when we feel that ache in her voice, we're reminded that there is beauty in breaking and holiness in hope. So if one night you find yourself driving through quiet roads and a Dolly Parton song comes on the radio, don't turn it off. Let it play. Because that voice, that light, that spirit, it isn't just her story anymore, it's ours. And somewhere as that song drifts through the air across towns and rivers and hearts, the woman who taught the world how to love through pain is still singing. Softly, faithfully, unending. Some stories were never meant to be known, but now you know. In the silence that follows her song, something lingers, something you can't quite name. It's the feeling of being seen by someone who has already survived everything you fear. Dolly Parton's voice does that. It reminds you that sorrow doesn't have to be loud to be powerful, and love doesn't have to be returned to be real. Her life from that cabin in the hills to the glitter of the Grand Ole Opry has always been proof that you can walk through fire and come out shining without ever losing your softness. There's a reason her story touches so many generations. She embodies the contradiction of being both fragile and indestructible. Beneath the rhinestones is a woman who once wept over a broken coat, who buried her brother under mountain soil, who whispered prayers for a niece she couldn't save, who said goodbye to the only man who ever called her baby. She's lived a dozen heartbreaks that would have silenced most people, but instead she turned them into hymns. At 79, she no longer chases applause. She doesn't need to. The songs have already outlived the fame. They belong to the quiet now, to hospital rooms where her voice comforts the lonely, to kitchens where mothers hum her lyrics as they cook, to long car rides where strangers find courage in her melodies. That's what legacy really means. It's not about how long people remember your name, but how deeply they feel your truth. And maybe that's why her story never fades, even as her body grows frail. Because every scar she ever carried became someone else's light. Every wound she healed in herself made room for others to believe in healing too. Somewhere in Nashville tonight, behind a softly lit window, she's probably sitting with her guitar. The air smells faintly of cedar and candle wax. The clock ticks steady and patient. She strums once lightly and smiles to herself. The melody that follows isn't for the world. It's for the people she's lost, the people she's loved, and the millions she's never met, but has somehow saved. Outside, the night deepens. The wind moves through the trees, and if you listen closely, you might almost hear it, the echo of that same little girl in the Smoky Mountains, singing into the dark, defiant and tender, reminding the world that pain is never the end of the story. Her music, like her spirit, will outlive us all, because Dolly Parton didn't just make songs, she made survival sound beautiful. And long after the last spotlight fades, her voice will still rise soft, golden, and eternal, whispering the same truth she's carried since the beginning. Love never dies. It only changes its key. Years from now, when the lights of Nashville dim and the echoes of her laughter have become part of the wind that rolls through the Tennessee hills, people will still tell stories about her. They'll speak of the rhinestones and the wigs, the laughter and the fame, but those will only be surface glimmers. The real story, the one that endures, is quieter. It's about a woman who refused to harden in a world that rewarded cruelty. A woman who met pain with grace, who wore forgiveness like a crown, and who kept singing when silence might have been easier. Somewhere, a child who has never known her name will open a book from the imagination library and begin to read. A melody might drift through the background, one of her songs playing softly on a radio decades old, and that child will feel something gentle, something pure, without knowing why. That is how immortality works for souls like hers. It isn't in statues or awards. It's in the way their kindness keeps echoing long after their voices have gone still. Dolly once said, "I'm not trying to live forever. I just want to leave something that does." And she has. Every word, every note, every prayer whispered into song has become part of the great shared heartbeat of the world. The little girl who once sang to the mountains ended up singing to humanity itself, and humanity listened. In the future, when people speak of her, they won't ask how many records she sold or how many stages she conquered. They'll remember how she made them feel less alone. They'll talk about the warmth in her voice that could make a stranger cry. They'll recall the sparkle in her eyes that said, "Even in the face of death, keep shining." So when you hear her name, don't think of endings. Think of music that never stops. Think of the child who became a queen without ever forgetting how to kneel in prayer. Think of the woman who gave away every piece of her heart and somehow ended up with more to give. Because in the end, Dolly Parton's greatest song wasn't one she sang on stage, it was the life she lived. Every verse was a lesson, every chorus a confession, every silence a kind of love. And long after her story becomes legend, her voice will still hum somewhere in the background of time, soft, steady, unbroken. Some legends fade, hers will not. Because some stories were never meant to end, they were meant to echo. And so the echo carries on through radio waves that hum over empty highways at midnight, through mothers' voices singing to their children as they fall asleep, through church halls where choirs still find her lyrics folded between psalms. Dolly Parton has become something more than a singer or an icon. She's become part of the collective rhythm of human resilience. The cadence of her story beats in time with everyone who has ever hurt and kept loving anyway. In quiet corners of the world, people still write to her thousands of letters a month. Some are thank yous, others are confessions. Your song saved my life. Your kindness made me believe again. You sang what I couldn't say. She reads as many as she can, often late at night, her glasses sliding down her nose, the ink smudging beneath her fingertips. Sometimes she laughs, sometimes she cries. Always she prays for them, every stranger who found shelter in her sound. She once said, "If I can help somebody smile even for a minute, then I've done my job." But what she's done is far greater. She's reminded the world that gentleness is a form of strength, that faith is not blind optimism, but a choice you make every single day, and that even the smallest act of love can ripple endlessly outward. In the twilight of her life, she stands not as a fading star, but as a constellation, her light scattered yet eternal, illuminating the sky for those who come after. New artists still chase her shadow, studying her words, her humility, her humor, her fire. They'll try to emulate her voice, her tone, her courage. But what they'll never be able to copy is her heart, the rare alchemy of empathy and endurance that made every syllable she ever sang feel like a touch. Someday, when her house on the hill falls silent and the chapel bells toll softly through the Tennessee air, people will listen. They'll close their eyes, and somewhere deep inside, they'll hear her again. That voice, tender, defiant, holy in its humanity, will rise from the past and sing as if no time has passed at all. And in that moment, we'll remember why she mattered. Not because she was perfect, but because she was proof that even broken things can shine. That beauty isn't in the absence of pain, but in the courage to turn it into something that heals. Dolly Parton's song will never really end. It will keep drifting through the world, carried by wind, by memory, by love. Because the girl who sang to the Smoky Mountains is still singing to the stars now, to eternity itself, and the mountains are still listening.